Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The TV light flickered against the thin curtains of my small living room, casting a blue haze across the framed photos on the wall. My late wife, our son in his high school graduation gown, me holding a model of the first robotic arm we ever built. On the screen, my son was smiling in a tailored Navy suit, hair slicked back, speaking confidently into the CNBC microphone. The caption beneath him read, "Ethan Hayden, CEO of Hayden Robotics, America's youngest tech visionary." When the host asked about his father, he laughed, leaning casually against the armrest. My father. He's a good man, but he's old school. A broke old man with outdated ideas. I love him, but let's just say this company needed a new generation to make it worth something. The audience chuckled. The host smiled awkwardly. I just sat there holding the remote, listening to the echo of laughter that wasn't meant for me but still cut through the air like a blade. They laughed at me on national television. My own son, the boy who once built toy robots with me at the kitchen table, called me a relic. I didn't turn off the TV. I didn't throw anything. I didn't say a word. I simply watched as he sipped from his glass of water and smiled for the cameras. Because I knew something he didn't. In 3 days, the world would learn who really owned his empire. I live on the outskirts of Austin, Texas now. The kind of neighborhood where porches creak and people still wave at each other from across the street. My house used to be the guest house behind our family estate. After my wife passed away, I stayed there even when Ethan moved into the main house. It's small but quiet. I've spent my whole life building things that work even when people didn't believe they would. Machine systems habits. A good machine doesn't scream when it's under pressure. It keeps running until the job's done. I guess that's what I became. 35 years ago, I started Hayden Robotics out of a 2-car garage with nothing but a borrowed lathe, a few tools, and a dream that machines could make hard labor safer for ordinary people. I was a blue-collar engineer, more grease than polish. But I knew design, precision, and discipline. We built warehouse automation systems long before Silicon Valley thought it was cool. Every screw, every line of code was a piece of me. The world saw a business. I saw a legacy. When Ethan came back from Harvard with a degree and an ego, I thought I'd done something right. He was bright, articulate, good with people. I believed he could take what I built and make it better. I handed him the keys to the company with pride. He looked me in the eye that day and said, "Dad, I'll make you proud." I believed him. I even transferred him 40% of the operational shares through our subsidiary to show my trust. The rest I kept under Hayden Holdings LLC, the parent company no one paid attention to. Ethan never asked. He thought he owned the world. The first few months were good. He brought in young investors, hosted sleek tech summits, made the brand look modern. I didn't mind the changes. I was proud. But then slowly, the meetings started happening without me. The board stopped sending me agendas. My keycard access at headquarters expired. My son stopped calling me Dad in public. It was Michael now, professional, distant. I knew what was happening, but I let it play out. Sometimes letting people underestimate you is the best way to see who they really are. The CNBC interview wasn't a surprise. I'd seen the press tour schedule on LinkedIn. What I didn't expect was the arrogance in his tone. When the host asked him about legacy, Ethan grinned. Legacy. Legacy is what you build, not what you inherit. He paused for effect. Some people cling to old machines, old ideas. I prefer progress. The host laughed. You mean your father's old school vision? Ethan shrugged. Let's just say we've upgraded. I turned the volume down my eyes on the reflection of his face in the window. Outside, the wind rustled through the oak trees, the same ones I planted the year he was born. The night air smelled like rain. Funny how life has a way of circling back. Every time I'd been betrayed, it had started with someone mistaking kindness for weakness. When the interview ended, the closing credits rolled over a highlight reel of Ethan shaking hands with investors, the headline flashing across the bottom of the screen: Young CEO secures $33 million Series B investment, Hayden Robotics, valued at $210 million. I watched the ticker crawl across, then looked around my small room. My father's old watch sat on the mantel. My wife's photo was beside it. For a long moment, I just stared at her picture. "Looks like our boy made it," I whispered. "Too bad he forgot who taught him to build." I stood up, turned off the TV, and walked to my desk. The desk was cluttered old mechanical drawings, invoices, some yellowed legal files. I booted up my old Dell laptop, the fan whirring like a tired engine. I opened the folder labeled Hayden Holdings. Private, something I hadn't looked at in years. The documents opened slowly: LLC registration forms, patent ownerships, parent company rights, and the original transfer of operational control to Hayden Robotics. There it was. My name. Michael E. Hayden, sole proprietor. Hayden Holdings, LLC, parent entity of Hayden Robotics, Inc. Every line was notarized, every page signed and sealed. I leaned back, feeling the weight of 3 decades of patience settle on my shoulders. For years, I thought legacy was about blood. Maybe it's really about blueprints. My son could have had both. He chose greed. On the TV in the background, the CNBC host's voice replayed the teaser for their next episode. Coming up next week, an inside look at Hayden Robotics' rapid rise and the father-son dynamic behind it all. I smiled for the first time that night. "Good," I muttered softly. "Let's make sure the world gets the full story." I opened a new browser tab and typed slowly, "Corporate Ownership Disclosure Texas, Legal Process. Then Series B Investment Parent Company Rights." I clicked enter. The screen filled with legal resources and government links. My pulse steadied, not from anger, but from clarity. "They think I'm just a broke old man," I said quietly to no one in particular. "Let's see how outdated the law really is." Outside, thunder rolled low over Austin, and the rain began to fall. I still remember the smell of machine oil and burned metal that clung to my clothes long after I came home from the factory. It wasn't the kind of smell you could wash out easily. It was a badge of the life I built. 35 years ago, I was just a mechanic at a manufacturing plant in Houston, working 10-hour shifts fixing conveyor belts and welding frames. My hands were rough, my paychecks modest, but every bolt I tightened was a lesson in patience. I didn't dream of money. I dreamed of building something that would last longer than me. The first time I saw an industrial robot arm in motion, I felt a shock of awe. It was at a trade show in Dallas, a massive orange machine that moved with precision, smoother than any human could match. The crowd saw technology. I saw opportunity. I thought if we could build machines like that for small factories, men like me wouldn't have to break our backs to survive. That idea stuck with me for years, until I decided to stop talking about it and start doing it. I sold my pickup, emptied the savings account my wife and I had built, and rented a warehouse with 2 old friends, Tomas Alvarez and Peter Wu. Together, we started Hayden Robotics. It wasn't much to look at than a metal shed with a single flickering light and a sign I painted by hand. The walls smelled of heat and rust. We didn't have investors or fancy offices. We had blueprints sketched on scrap paper and a promise to each other we'd make machines that worked and that we'd be proud to put our names on. Those early days were brutal. We'd spend 14 hours at the shop, sleep on folding cots, and eat whatever was cheap canned beans, instant noodles, or the sandwiches my wife Marianne sent from home. I can still picture her walking into the warehouse one evening with a Tupperware of stew, shaking her head at the mess of wires and tools. "You may not be rich," she said, smiling softly, "but you're building something that matters." I didn't know it then, but that single sentence would carry me through every hardship that came after. Over the years, our machines got smarter, smaller, faster. We designed robotic welders for auto plants, sorting systems for warehouses, assembly line assistants for small manufacturers who couldn't afford the big industrial giants. We weren't flashy, but we were reliable, and in Texas, reliability counts for something. I wore the same grease-stained jacket to every client meeting. While the world chased trends, I focused on making sure our robots didn't fail when people needed them most. By 2005, Hayden Robotics had grown from a 3-man shop to a company with over 100 employees. Our machines were running in facilities from Austin to San Antonio. Local newspapers started calling me the blue-collar engineer. I never liked the nickname, but I understood why they used it. I wasn't some genius inventor. I was a worker who refused to quit. When reporters asked for business advice, I'd tell them the same thing. Every time success isn't about outsmarting others. It's about outworking them. Ethan grew up watching all of this. As a boy, he'd run through the workshop after school dodging cables and oil drums, asking questions about how every machine worked. I'd let him hold the controller for the prototype robots and laugh when his small hands trembled under the joystick. He'd look at me with those curious eyes and say, "Dad, I want to build something just like you someday." That boyish excitement, those words meant more to me than any headline or contract. I thought maybe this is what legacy really means. Time, of course, doesn't slow down for anyone. By the time Ethan went to college, Hayden Robotics was stable, profitable, and trusted. I started stepping back from the floor, focusing more on managing than welding or coding. Marianne used to tease me for checking blueprints at the dinner table, but she never complained. She said I'd earned the right to slow down. I never did. Then she got sick. Cancer. 3 months after Ethan's graduation, she was gone. The house was quiet in a way that hurt. Ethan came home for the funeral, wearing a black suit that didn't quite fit. I remember standing next to him, both of us staring at her picture surrounded by white lilies. He put his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "I'll take care of you, Dad. I'll make the company proud." I believed him completely. After that, I threw myself into work again because it was the only way I knew to keep breathing. Ethan went back to Harvard for his MBA, calling me every Sunday to talk about scaling and venture capital. I didn't understand half of what he said, but I loved hearing his enthusiasm. When he graduated, he came home like a storm-sharp suit, bright ideas, confidence radiating off him like heat. He talked about rebranding global markets, digitization, automation as a service. I listened quietly, proud but slightly lost. The boy who once asked how to wire a servo motor was now lecturing me about algorithms. When he pitched his vision to the board, I watched him stand in front of the same men who'd once laughed at my oil-stained jacket. Now they leaned forward, captivated by his charisma. Hayden Robotics 2.0, he called it. A modern company for a modern world. I clapped louder than anyone. It was a proud moment, the passing of a torch. At the official ceremony, I gave him the keys to the headquarters, the same keys I'd jingled in my pocket every morning for decades. "It's all yours now, son," I told him. "Just remember, the foundation matters more than the design." He smiled and nodded, but I noticed a flicker of something in his eyes. Ambition can look a lot like light until it burns. In the weeks that followed, Ethan moved fast. He changed the logo, updated the website, repainted the lobby. The new slogan read, "Reinventing Tomorrow." I didn't mind. The employees adored him, investors called non-stop, and the press crowned him the next big thing in robotics. For the first time in years, I took a step back and watched. Then one night, long after everyone had left the office, I stopped by to pick up a few things. I heard voices coming from the conference room. Ethan was on a video call with a group of investors laughing. "My dad's great," he was saying, "but he doesn't understand scale. He's too sentimental. We'll modernize everything once he's fully retired." I froze in the hallway. The word sentimental stung more than I expected. I had given my life to build this place brick by brick, and now I was an obstacle to be phased out. I stood there in the dark, listening, then quietly turned away. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat by the window watching the streetlights glow faintly through the rain. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I just felt old, like one of my own machines, reliable but outdated. I whispered to myself, "He doesn't know it, but he just broke the first bolt in our foundation." I looked over at Marianne's photo on the shelf and forced a smile. "You'd tell me to be patient, wouldn't you?" Then I opened my old toolbox, the same one I'd carried since 1987. Inside were the blueprints of our first prototype, the faded paperwork for Hayden Holdings, and a note I'd scribbled years ago: "Never forget what you built." That night I realized something. You can hand over your company, your money, your legacy, but if you built it with your own hands, no one can ever truly take it from you. The day of the ceremony felt like a dream, painted in glass and light. The headquarters gleamed under a new banner, Hayden Robotics 2.0. The air smelled of fresh paint and expensive cologne, not the oil and steel that used to define the place. Cameras flashed, investors shook hands, and I stood near the front row, a guest in the house I had built. Ethan looked sharp on stage, his black suit perfectly tailored, his smile brighter than the lights. "Today marks a new era for Hayden Robotics," he announced, voice booming through the speakers. "An era driven by innovation, not nostalgia." People laughed and clapped. I did too, though something inside me clenched. His words weren't meant to sting, but they did. Nostalgia to me meant the foundation, the sweat, the nights, the years we spent making sure every machine worked before it carried our name. To him, nostalgia was something to outgrow. After the applause, Ethan waved me up to the stage. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of 3 decades on my shoulders. He handed me a plaque engraved with founder and visionary. Cameras clicked as I shook his hand. For a fleeting second, our eyes met, and I thought I saw a spark of the boy who once built toy robots beside me. But when he turned back to the audience, that spark was gone, replaced by the glint of a man who believed he'd already surpassed me. Later that week, Ethan called his first leadership meeting. The boardroom looked nothing like the one I'd designed: sleek white table screens covering the walls and a new digital logo, HRX. I took my usual seat near the end, notebook in hand. Ethan stood at the head of the table, laser pointer flashing through slides. "We'll streamline production," he said confidently. "Cut older models, outsource manufacturing to Asia, and focus on premium robotics for luxury sectors." I frowned slightly. "Luxury? We built this company for working factories, not showrooms." He smiled patronizingly. "Dad, times have changed. There's more profit in presentation than precision now. Investors want excitement." "I thought customers wanted reliability," I said softly. He didn't answer. The room shifted uncomfortably. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind watching him high-five the young executives he'd hired from his MBA network. They looked at me the way people look at a relic in a museum, respectful but irrelevant. 2 weeks later, he invited me to lunch at a new restaurant downtown. It was the kind of place with glass walls and waiters who whispered. He ordered sushi and champagne. I stuck to black coffee. "So," he said, leaning back, "Equinox Ventures wants to invest $33 million. They believe in my vision." "Your vision?" I asked quietly. "Hayden Robotics is ready to scale globally, Dad. Europe, Asia, maybe even IPO in 2 years. I nodded slowly. And what about the people who've been with us since the beginning? He shrugged. We'll restructure. Some won't fit the new direction. I stirred my coffee. Your mother used to say progress isn't about forgetting where you started. He sighed. You always get sentimental. The word, again. Sentimental. Like caring was a flaw. The deal with Equinox went through fast. The papers were signed in a glass tower in downtown Austin. I attended as a formality. Lance Murdoch, the investor, was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that could slice marble. He clasped Ethan's hand and said, You've got the spark, son. Let's make history. When I introduced myself, Lance just nodded politely and moved on. I was invisible. The flashbulbs went off, the champagne poured, and Hayden Robotics was suddenly valued at $210 million. The world called it a triumph. To me, it felt like a sale. Afterward, Ethan's life changed almost overnight. He bought a penthouse in Dallas, a new Tesla, and began appearing on every magazine cover from Forbes to Tech Weekly. He started giving speeches about innovation, calling himself the new face of American robotics. I watched every interview proud and uneasy at the same time. One evening, I caught a segment on CNBC. The host praised Ethan for building the company from the ground up. Ethan smiled and said, We've come a long way from my father's garage. My father's garage. He didn't even correct himself. At the office, things changed too. My access card stopped working for certain labs. The weekly reports I used to review stopped arriving. I didn't complain. I just showed up less and less. The younger staff whispered around me, unsure whether to say hello. I didn't blame them. They were loyal to their paychecks, not to memories. Then came the board meeting. I should have sensed it earlier. The email arrived with the subject line, Leadership Transition Proposal. I walked into the conference room to find the entire board seated, including Lance. Ethan stood at the head of the table again, perfectly composed. Dad, he began, you've always been the heart of this company. But as we enter a new phase, we need a more modern structure. I didn't speak. Lance added smoothly, Michael, this isn't about disrespect. It's about evolution. You'll remain founder emeritus, of course, a respected figurehead. Ethan slid a document toward me. You'll always have a place here, Dad. Just not in operations. The words hung heavy in the air. My hand tightened around my pen. I looked around the table faces. I didn't recognize people who'd never seen me weld a single joint. I signed. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and said quietly, If you remove the foundation from a house, don't be surprised when it falls. Then I left. Outside, the sun was setting behind the glass building. The company's new logo shimmered on the side, HRX Reinventing Tomorrow. It looked cold, detached, sterile. The next day, I came back to clear my office. My nameplate had already been replaced, Michael Hayden, founder emeritus. The family photo that once sat on my desk was gone. Even the prototype robot arm I'd built 20 years ago had been moved to storage. The security guard, a kid barely 20, stopped me at the door. I'm sorry, sir, he said awkwardly. New policy. Need clearance to enter after hours. I smiled faintly. It's all right, son. You're just doing your job. I gathered my remaining files, mostly old designs and technical drawings, and opened the bottom drawer. There it was, a dusty folder labeled Hayden Holdings LLC, Ownership and Patents. The paperwork I'd kept all those years, the one Ethan never asked about. I brushed the dust off and tucked it under my arm. That evening, Ethan called. Dad, it's nothing personal, he said, his voice too rehearsed. I looked out at the fading skyline. That's what your grandfather used to say when he foreclosed on people's homes. He sighed. Don't guilt trip me. You don't understand scale. This is bigger than your blue-collar ideals. You're right, I said. It's bigger. But so is gravity, and everything that rises will fall under it. He hung up without replying. I stood there for a long while, the phone still warm in my hand. Through the window, the company tower glowed against the night sky, proud and blind. He thought he had buried me in that boardroom. He didn't realize I'd been measuring the ground all along. The email came at 6:42 a.m., stamped urgent attendance required, emergency board meeting. The subject line was polite, but the message underneath was a blade wrapped in courtesy. I drove to headquarters in silence. The city still half asleep, the sunrise catching on the mirrored glass of the HRX building like fire. The new logo shimmered in the light, cold, corporate efficient. The place didn't smell like metal or sweat anymore. It smelled like money and disinfectant. Inside, the receptionist didn't look up as I passed. Everyone seemed busier voices, lower movements, sharper. I took the elevator up to the 12th floor where the boardroom waited, behind tall glass doors etched with the new company motto, "Reinventing Tomorrow." I paused for a moment, almost laughing at the irony. I had spent my life building today. The boardroom was full when I entered. Ethan stood near the end of the long mahogany table, perfectly composed in his tailored navy suit. His hair slicked back, his expression confident but rehearsed. Around him sat a dozen people, investors, advisors, consultants, all younger and smoother than me. At the far end, Lance Murdoch leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen rhythmically against a stack of papers. "Glad you could join us, Dad," Ethan said without warmth. "We were just getting started." I took the seat at the corner, the one I'd occupied for 20 years. The same chair where I'd once fought for budgets, for safety standards, for better pay for welders. Now, I felt like a relic, the last manual part in a digital machine. The presentation began. Ethan spoke about agility, scalability, brand repositioning. Each slide was another nail in the coffin of everything I had built. When the title Founder Transition Plan appeared on the screen, my chest tightened, but I said nothing. Lance smiled. "Michael, this is really a formality. You've carried this company further than anyone thought possible, and we're grateful. But as we prepare for the global launch, it's time for a leadership refresh. Think of it as passing the torch." Ethan added quickly, "You'll retain an honorary title, Founder Emeritus. We'd still love your advice." I looked down at the pen in my hand. The same model I used to sign our very first manufacturing contract. It suddenly felt heavier than steel. "I see," I said quietly. Lance slid a folder toward me. "We'll make this as seamless as possible. The investors are already briefed." I flipped through the papers. Legal language, corporate jargon, the kind of text meant to look official and sound kind. At the bottom was a signature line waiting for me like an open grave. Ethan's voice softened, rehearsed for sympathy. "It's nothing personal, Dad. This is just business." I looked up at him and smiled faintly. "That's what your grandfather used to say when he took people's homes." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan frowned, the charm slipping from his face for a second. I signed the papers without another word. Before leaving, I said, "If you remove the foundation from a house, don't be surprised when it falls." I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out. The room stayed silent until the door closed behind me. Outside, the hallway gleamed with glass and chrome, every reflection showing me a man who no longer belonged. The HRX logo glowed on the far wall, blue and white, replacing the old red emblem that once bore our family name. I walked past it without looking back. That evening, the announcement hit the media like wildfire. Hayden Robotics, announced leadership transition, founder retires. The photo they used showed me standing behind Ethan, half in shadow. On CNBC, Lance spoke about embracing the future, while Ethan called it the natural evolution of a family legacy. I watched from a coffee shop near my neighborhood, the hum of the espresso machine drowning out the sound of their voices. The barista glanced at the TV and then at me. "That your company?" he asked. I nodded. "Used to be." He looked awkward and walked away. On screen, Ethan laughed with the host. The caption read, "The visionary's son who modernized robotics." They were celebrating my funeral, and I didn't even need a coffin. The next morning, I drove back to headquarters to clear my office. Security stopped me at the door. "Sorry, Mr. Barhayden," the guard said nervously. "Your clearance has been downgraded. Need to check with management." "Don't bother," I told him. "I'm just here to collect my things." The hallway to my office felt like a museum. The photos of early factory builds, the first prototype arm gone, replaced by glossy posters of smiling executives and taglines about innovation. When I reached my old door, the nameplate had already changed. Michael Hayden, Founder Emeritus. Inside the desk was empty except for a few forgotten papers. The air smelled of lemon polish instead of solder and coffee. I packed slowly, careful not to take anything that wasn't mine. In the bottom drawer, I found a folder marked Hayden Holdings, LLC. Ownership and patent rights. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters. I had forgotten it even existed. When we'd incorporated decades ago, I'd formed the parent company separately for tax reasons. Hayden Robotics was technically a subsidiary, and every design, every patent, every contract funneled through that entity. My name was still on the registration. Ethan had never noticed. I smiled faintly, slipped the folder into my briefcase, and walked out. In the parking garage, Ethan caught up to me. "Dad," he said out of breath, "we didn't mean to blindside you like that." I turned, keeping my voice even. "Didn't you?" He hesitated. "It's not about you. It's about the company's growth. I need investors to see I'm in full control." "Control," I repeated. "That's what you think this is about?" He nodded, impatient. "You built something amazing, but you don't understand scale. We're global now. This isn't your blue-collar world anymore." I leaned against the truck, meeting his eyes. "You're right. My world was built with hands, not hashtags. But here's the thing about foundations, son. They're invisible until they crack." He scoffed. "You can't threaten me, Dad." "I'm not threatening you," I said quietly. "I'm reminding you." He stared at me for a long moment before turning away. The echo of his footsteps disappeared into the garage. That night I drove home under a sky streaked with lightning. The rain started just as I parked. I sat there for a while, listening to it drum against the windshield. The folder on the passenger seat glowed faintly under the dashboard light. When I finally went inside, I placed it on my kitchen table beside my old coffee mug and a stack of unpaid bills. I made a note in my journal. They replaced my name on the door, but not on the deed. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and watched the city lights shimmer in the puddles outside. Ethan was probably at some rooftop bar, celebrating with his investors, unaware that the ground beneath his empire still belonged to me. The world thought I'd been defeated. They didn't know I was just taking measurements. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed softly against the tin roof of my small house on the outskirts of Austin, a slow, steady rhythm that matched the silence of the rooms. My new home was nothing like the house I'd once shared with Marianne. This was a converted storage shed with a single bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a garage that doubled as an office. But it was mine, and it was quiet. After 35 years of noise machines meetings, men shouting over drills, the silence felt almost heavy. Every morning I woke before dawn, made coffee, and read the business section out of habit. I told myself I didn't care, but my eyes always found the same name, Hayden Robotics. Ethan's face seemed to be everywhere. Magazines, billboards, TV interviews. He was the new face of Texas Tech, the visionary son of an old engineer. The media loved the story, a broke old man replaced by his brilliant heir. One afternoon I turned on CNBC, just as they aired an exclusive interview with Ethan. He sat across from a famous host in a tailored suit, perfectly confident under the studio lights. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Ethan Hayden, CEO of Hayden Robotics, reinventing tomorrow. The host leaned forward. You've taken your father's company and turned it into a billion-dollar brand in less than a year. How does that feel? Ethan smiled. It feels incredible. My father was a great man, but he was holding us back. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions for progress. And do you still talk to him? The host asked. Ethan chuckled, leaning back. Not much these days. He's living quietly now, probably tinkering in his garage like a broke old man. The audience laughed. The host smiled uncomfortably. I turned the volume down, staring at the screen. For a long moment, I didn't feel anger, just an ache so deep it made my chest tighten. I switched off the TV and sat there in the fading afternoon light, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. Outside, the rain stopped. I opened the garage door and stepped out, breathing in the wet air. The smell of damp earth and motor oil hit me like memory. I picked up an old wrench from the workbench, the same one Ethan used as a boy, when we built his first model robot. The metal was cold familiar. I wiped it clean and set it back down carefully. They mocked me on TV, I said quietly, almost to myself. Let them. I smiled faintly. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. The days began to blur. I filled them with small repairs for neighbors fixing lawn mowers, old radios, a washing machine or two. It wasn't about the money. I just needed something to do with my hands. People still recognized me sometimes. You're that robotics guy, right? The old engineer, they'd ask. I'd nod, smile, and say, used to be. At night, I'd sit on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. I thought of Marianne, of her steady hands and warm patience. She would have told me not to waste my energy on bitterness. Let the truth build itself, she used to say. I wondered if she would still say that now. One evening at the grocery store, I ran into Tomas, my old foreman from the factory days. He looked surprised to see me there, wearing a worn jacket and carrying a basket of canned soup and bread. Mike, he said softly. I saw the interview. I wanted to reach out. Nothing to reach out about, I said, forcing a small smile. He shook his head. He may have the money, but you have the design. I frowned. What do you mean? Tomas pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to me. I was cleaning out the old storage unit. Remember the one we used before HRX moved? I found this. Figured it might be important. At home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside were copies of the original registration documents for Hayden Holdings LLC, the parent company I had founded decades earlier. The ownership papers still listed me as the sole proprietor. Attached were copies of patents and intellectual property filings, all under my name. For a long moment, I just stared at them. My heart beat slower, heavier. The rain had stopped outside, but thunder rolled faintly in the distance. They stripped me of titles, I murmured, but not ownership. I spread the papers across the table, reading each line, every seal, every signature. It was all still valid. They had never filed a transfer, never dissolved the parent company. Ethan and Lance had built their empire on top of my foundation, and legally, that foundation was still mine. I leaned back in the chair, the corner of my mouth lifting. The first genuine smile in months. The next day, I spent hours in the garage. I pulled out my old laptop, its fan humming loudly, and opened a fresh document. I began to type Parent Company Hayden Holdings, LLC. active. Legal owner, Michael E. Hayden. Then one by one, I listed every patent number, every document code, every record I could find. I double-checked everything online through the Texas Business Registry. Every entry confirmed what I already knew. Ethan had taken my name off the door, but not off the deed. That night, I sat outside again, the papers neatly stacked beside me. I looked up at the stars. Somewhere across the city, Ethan was probably celebrating another interview, another deal. He believed he'd won. Maybe I am a broke old man, I said softly. But broke doesn't mean powerless. The next morning, I drove into town to meet Tomas for breakfast. The diner smelled of bacon grease and coffee. The kind of place where you could think without being noticed. We sat in the back booth. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I think it's time to stop letting other people write my story." Tomas nodded. "Whatever you're planning, Mike, make it smart." Not angry. "I'm done with anger," I said. Now it's about balance. When I got home, I cleared the garage completely, tools on one side, files on the other. I set up a small desk and taped a blank sheet of paper to the wall. At the top, I wrote 3 words. Find the leverage. For hours, I mapped out everything: company structure, ownership, filings, news cycles, public image. I'd spent my life designing machines that could withstand pressure. Now I was designing something else, a plan that would work the same way. Quiet, precise, unstoppable. As the sun set, I brewed another pot of coffee and sat in front of the computer again. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. I opened the state's online filing portal and began cross-referencing records. Each click brought me closer to something solid, something undeniable. When I finally closed the laptop, I whispered, "They thought they buried me." But I was just learning how to dig. The house was still the hum of the refrigerator, soft and steady. On the table, the folder from Tomas sat like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. I reached for it and ran my fingers across the old seal one more time. The storm outside began to fade, replaced by the steady chirp of crickets. I turned off the lights and stood at the doorway for a long moment, listening to the quiet. The foundation was still mine, I said under my breath. All I needed was patience. The night stretched long and silent, broken only by the soft hum of my old laptop. The light from the desk lamp cast a thin yellow halo over the piles of documents spread out before me. Coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't care. I was tracing history my own. Each page, each signature was a breadcrumb leading me back to what I had built and what they thought they'd stolen. I had read through hundreds of contracts before I found it, the line that stopped my breath. Section 4.3. All intellectual property patents and derivative entities under Hayden Holdings remain property of the founder unless explicitly transferred by notarized amendment. I sat there for a long moment, the hum of the laptop filling the room. Then I flipped through every page again, searching for the amendment that would invalidate it. Nothing. They never filed one. The realization settled like a slow sunrise. Hayden Robotics wasn't Ethan's empire. It was mine. Everything, the patents, the assets, the technology, still rested on a foundation legally tied to me. The son had built his castle on his father's land. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You forgot the paperwork, kid," I murmured. And paperwork never forgets. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds. I printed out the relevant pages, highlighted sections, and organized everything into folders. I labeled one ownership proof, another patent chain. The engineer in me couldn't resist order. Each document was a bolt. Each clause a piece of steel holding the truth together. When the printer finally stopped, I closed my eyes for a moment, exhaustion sinking in. I hadn't felt alive like this in months. Revenge wasn't what I wanted, not exactly. What I wanted was balance the restoration of truth. By noon, I was sitting in a small law office on West 5th Street, surrounded by mahogany shelves and the faint smell of old paper. Across the desk sat Howard Kincaid, a man in his late 60s with silver hair, reading glasses, and the calm confidence of someone who'd seen every kind of greed. He flipped through the documents in silence. Every few minutes he'd pause, nod, and hum softly. When he finally looked up, his eyes had the spark of discovery. "Michael, do you realize what you have here?" "I think I do," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "Your son doesn't own Hayden Robotics. You do. Legally, it's still part of Hayden Holdings. You never signed it over." I folded my hands. I thought I did years ago. Guess I was too sentimental to read the fine print. Howard chuckled. "Sometimes sentiment saves you." He tapped the folder. "You have a clean chain of ownership, unbroken filings, valid patents, and tax returns under your name. If you file an ownership confirmation with the court, it'll be public record instantly. Every investor, every partner will see it." I watched him carefully. "How fast?" "Within 24 hours. I nodded slowly. "Then we wait. Timing matters." Howard smiled faintly. "You engineers are all the same. You plan revenge like it's a project schedule." I grinned. "It's not revenge, Howard. It's maintenance." He laughed. "I like that." For the next few hours, we reviewed every file building the case like blueprints for a structure no one would see until it stood completed. Howard's assistant scanned and notarized each document. I signed where needed, my hand steady. When we finished, he placed everything in a thick envelope stamped "Confidential." "Don't go public yet," he advised. "Let him dig his own hole a little deeper. He's got that big expansion event coming up next month, right?" I nodded. "Dallas Convention Center, live stream and all." "Perfect," he said, slipping the envelope into a briefcase. "Let's make sure the audience is bigger when the truth hits." That evening, I returned home and brewed fresh coffee. The garage smelled of oil and paper, the scent of two different lives colliding. I turned on the small TV in the corner. Ethan was on Forbes Live, shaking hands with investors. He looked unstoppable, confident young rich. The chyron at the bottom read, "Ethan Hayden, the new face of American robotics." I muted the sound and watched. He gestured with ease, laughed at the interviewer's jokes, and told stories about starting from scratch. I couldn't decide if it was arrogance or ignorance that made him forget where he came from. In the corner of the screen, I caught a brief headline from a ticker: "Hayden Robotics announces global expansion to Europe and Asia." The louder his voice grew on screen, the calmer I felt. Pride and disappointment tangled inside me until they were indistinguishable. The world saw a visionary. I saw a boy playing with matches in a house I'd built. I opened my laptop again and began collecting evidence of his public statements. Every interview, every tweet, every article that credited him alone as the founder. If he tried to deny knowledge later, these words would serve as proof of his deception. My folders filled one by one: media claims ownership filings, public misrepresentation. Revenge, after all, was a machine, and machines ran best when built with precision. 3 nights later, I got a call. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Hayden." The voice was young female professional. "This is Claire Donovan from the Austin Chronicle. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You're not," I said, though she clearly had no idea how late it was. "What can I do for you, Miss Donovan?" "I'm working on a feature about local tech pioneers. I came across something unusual. According to the Texas Secretary of State's database, Hayden Robotics still lists its parent entity as Hayden Holdings LLC with you as the owner. Is that accurate?" My lips curved slightly. "Everything on paper usually is." She hesitated. "Would you be willing to comment Off the record, perhaps? No comment, I said. Not yet. Timing is everything. I understand, she replied. If I may ask one last thing, why haven't you said anything all this time? I thought about that for a moment before answering. Because truth doesn't need noise. It just needs patience. She thanked me, and I could hear the curiosity in her tone before she hung up. I sat there for a while, the dial tone fading into silence. When I stepped outside the Texas, night was heavy with humidity. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of the HRX tower from my porch. It stood tall, arrogant, and beautiful, like a monument to forgetfulness. I took a slow breath. Machines don't make mistakes. People do. Back inside, I laid the documents across the desk one last time, checking each signature under the lamplight. Everything was in order. Every bolt tightened, every circuit sealed. The old habits of a builder never left you. Before shutting down the laptop, I opened a new folder and labeled it Blueprint, Phase 2. Underneath, I typed the first note. Coordinate with Howard. Confirm timing. Secure public disclosure. Then I saved the file and closed the screen. The room fell into darkness, except for the faint glow of the HRX tower outside my window. I watched it for a long while, hands folded, heart steady. They think I'm an old man clinging to the past, I whispered. But I built the ground they're standing on, and the ground always remembers its maker. The garage had become my war room. The smell of solder and paper filled the air, and the walls were covered in notes and diagrams. I'd drawn everything out like a machine schematic, arrows, flowcharts, timing marks. Above the desk, 3 handwritten lines in black marker read, Step 1, verify ownership. Step 2, document public spending. Step 3, prepare legal filing. Outside the neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog. The world went about its business, unaware that a retired engineer in a rusted garage was about to pull the floor out from under a multi-million-dollar company. I sipped my coffee, clicked open a spreadsheet, and started another line of calculations. Machines obey logic, I muttered. So does justice if you build it right. By mid-morning, I was at Howard Kincaid's office again. His secretary smiled politely as I walked in, carrying a thick folder of updated documents. Howard looked up from behind his desk glasses halfway down his nose. Back so soon, Michael? I'm ready, I said, dropping the folder on his desk. We'll move when the timing's perfect. He flipped through the paperwork, nodding slowly. You've documented everything. Every patent, every tax filing, every cent he spent using assets registered under Hayden Holdings. Howard chuckled softly. You've done half my job for me. I've been managing machines my whole life. This is just another one made of lawyers instead of steel. He grinned. Then let's keep the gears turning. For hours, we went over the filing strategy. The plan was simple, precise, and devastating. At the height of Ethan's next public event, his global expansion press conference, we'd submit the ownership confirmation notice to the Texas Commercial Court. The filing would immediately become public record, confirming that Hayden Holdings, and therefore Hayden Robotics, was legally mine. Every news outlet in the country would see it before Ethan could react. Howard leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. We'll let his arrogance do half our work, he said. Exactly, I replied. He's so busy being seen he won't notice what's happening behind the curtain. We finalized the filing papers, sealed them in an envelope, and locked them in his safe. Patience, Michael, he said as I stood to leave. The law doesn't move fast, but it moves clean. I nodded. So do the best machines. That night I drove home under a red sunset. The city lights were coming on one by one, and I could see the HRX tower gleaming in the distance. I imagined Ethan sitting in his penthouse, surrounded by screens and assistants smiling at his reflection in the glass. He had no idea how fragile it all was. Meanwhile, Claire Donovan had started connecting dots of her own. At the Austin Chronicle newsroom, she sat at her cluttered desk, scrolling through state filings and archived interviews. She had spent weeks chasing rumors about corporate shell companies and undisclosed ownerships. What she found made her pulse quicken. Every path led back to one name: mine. That evening, she called. "Mr. Hayden, it's Claire. I verified everything you told me. The company filings, the patents, the LLC records. It all checks out. Are you planning to go public?" "Not me," I said. "The truth will." She hesitated. "I could run the story next week. It would shake the whole tech community." "Wait," I told her. "Not yet. Let him stand on stage one last time. Let the spotlight be bright enough for everyone to see the fall." Claire was silent for a moment, then said softly, "You're not doing this out of anger, are you?" "I stopped being angry a long time ago," I said. "Now it's about precision." After we hung up, I sat back and stared at the documents spread across the table. The plan was in motion. All that remained was time. Ethan, meanwhile, was living the high life. Every week brought a new headline: the visionary of Texas tech. The young CEO who reinvented robotics. He'd just announced partnerships in Europe and Japan. Social media flooded with his interviews, his confident smile lighting up the screens. But beneath the polish, cracks were forming. Inside, Hayden Robotics employees whispered about overextended budgets, delayed shipments, software glitches. One engineer even emailed me privately from his personal account, "Mr. Hayden, the old servo algorithm you wrote still works better than the new one. We still use your code when nobody's looking." I read the message twice, smiled and deleted it. At a dinner party in Dallas, a journalist asked Ethan about the viral #forgotten founder posts that had started to circulate online. A few tech blogs had picked up whispers about the ownership filings. Ethan laughed it off, saying, "People love a good myth." My father was a builder, not a businessman. The next morning, his PR team flooded social media with polished videos of him visiting production facilities, shaking hands, and donating to STEM charities. He was confident again. But confidence can be a dangerous kind of blindness. Back in Austin, Claire worked late nights preparing her article. She titled it, "The Forgotten Founder of Hayden Robotics." Every paragraph was backed by documents, quotes, and timestamps. She had interviews from former employees, copies of the original registration forms, even statements from Howard, verifying the legal filings. She scheduled the story for publication at 11:00 a.m. on March 17th, the same day as Ethan's global expansion press conference. On the morning of March 16th, I met Howard one last time. He handed me a slim briefcase containing all the verified documents. "Everything's ready," he said. "Once I file this, there's no going back." "That's the point," I said. "You're not going to watch it live?" "I'll watch," I said, smiling. "But from home, quietly." He shook my hand firmly. "You built a hell of a case, Michael. Hell of a machine." I drove home through the rolling Texas hills, windows down, the wind warm against my face. It had been years since I'd felt this kind of calm. This wasn't vengeance, it was equilibrium, the slow turning of gears back into place. That night, I sat in the garage under the dim light bulb, checking my notes one last time. The filing packet was ready. Claire's story was ready. The timing was perfect. I placed the documents in a brown envelope and wrote across the front in careful letters, "For delivery. March 17th, 11:00 a.m. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. The rain outside had stopped and the smell of wet earth drifted through the open window. I thought about Ethan, not as a rival, but as my son. I thought of the boy who used to sit on my lap while I showed him how to calibrate servos. The one who once said, "I want to build something that lasts just like you." Somewhere along the line, he'd confused lasting with winning. I set the coffee down and turned off the light. The garage sank into darkness, save for the faint red glow of the clock. "Revenge doesn't need noise," I whispered. "It just needs timing." The next morning, I woke early. The sunrise painted the sky gold over the HRX tower. Somewhere up there, Ethan was rehearsing his speech, surrounded by cameras and press agents. The air was calm, almost too calm. The kind of calm you get right before a storm. I put on my old work jacket, poured another cup of coffee, and watched the city wake up. The plan was ready. The timing was set. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the satisfaction of a builder who knew the structure was finally sound. The morning air was cool and sharp, the kind that carries silence farther than sound. I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching the sun edge over the trees, painting the city gold. The HRX tower glimmered faintly in the distance, its steel ribs catching the light. The news was already buzzing Hayden Robotics to announce major international expansion. The date, March 17th, scrolled across the screen. My fingers tightened around the mug. The timing was perfect. Sometimes I said quietly, "The wind picks the same direction twice." Inside the garage was clean, orderly, humming with quiet focus. Every document had been reviewed, every file double-checked. On the desk sat the briefcase with the official filings sealed, signed, waiting. Howard would deliver them to the courthouse tomorrow at 11. At that exact minute, Ethan would be standing in front of the cameras, preaching innovation and legacy. Machines didn't lie. Neither did paper. At 9, my phone buzzed. Claire Donovan's name flashed across the screen. "Everything's ready," she said. "The article is scheduled for 11 a.m. tomorrow." The headline reads, "The Forgotten Founder of Hayden Robotics." "You sure about the timing?" "Positive," I said. "Let him step into the spotlight before the lights burn too bright." She hesitated. "You know this will destroy his career, right?" I took a long breath. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just turning on the power." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "Good luck, Mr. Hayden," and hung up. I placed the phone on the workbench and turned to the whiteboard, where my plans still hung 3 lines, 3 steps now, all crossed out. The machine was built. Tomorrow it would run. Meanwhile, the city was alive with headlines and noise. Ethan was everywhere, magazine covers, radio interviews, social media posts counting down to the big event. Hayden Robotics, the future of automation. The press called it the next Tesla. Investors flooded in. Every channel echoed his name. At night, I sat in my chair by the window, flipping through channels. His voice filled every room. "We're not just changing technology," he said. "On one program, we're changing the way the world thinks." He looked calm, confident, unstoppable. The camera loved him. I watched him talk about leadership, innovation, global partnerships. I'd heard that tone before, the sound of someone who believed the rules no longer applied to them. Pride could blind even the smartest engineer. And pride was a fragile wire. Across town, Howard and Claire were making their own quiet preparations. In his office, Howard sealed the final version of the ownership filing into a manila envelope and placed it in his briefcase. The top page bore the court's watermark and a small red seal. He checked his watch, 24 hours to go. At the Austin Chronicle, Claire reviewed her draft for the 100th time. Her editor leaned against the doorway. "You sure about this one, Claire? This isn't just a tech story. It's going to blow up the whole market." She looked up from her computer. "It's not a story about tech," she said. "It's a story about truth." The editor frowned. "You're not worried about backlash?" "Not as long as the facts hold," she said. "And they do." She clicked schedule post and set the timer, March 17th, 11:00 a.m. The night before the conference, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the old workshop where it had all started, the first robot arm, the cracked concrete floor, the smell of oil that never really left. The machines were gone, but the ghosts remained. I ran a hand along the dusty workbench, remembering the nights I'd spent here with Marianne, her laughter mixing with the whir of motors, the hum of creation. That was the difference between us. Ethan built for attention, I built for endurance. I turned off the lights and stood for a long while listening to the Texas night. The chirp of crickets, the distant hum of the city, the faint roll of thunder far away. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear my son's voice when he was a boy. "Dad, how do you know when something's perfect?" "When it works quietly," I'd said. He'd laughed, not understanding. Maybe now he would. The morning came bright and cloudless. The air smelled of rain that hadn't yet fallen. I brewed coffee, shaved, and put on a clean shirt. The garage looked different in daylight, neater, calmer, almost sacred. On the desk sat the briefcase, the edges worn from handling the brass latch, gleaming. At 10:15, Howard texted on my way to the courthouse. At 10:30, Claire sent a message. Countdown begins. 30 minutes. At 10:45, I switched on the TV. The Dallas Convention Center buzzed with life. Hundreds of reporters packed the room, cameras flashing. A banner hung above the stage, Hayden Robotics, reinventing the future. Ethan appeared in a crisp gray suit, shaking hands with sponsors, smiling as if the world were already his. I studied him carefully, the way he straightened his tie, the confident tilt of his chin. He had his mother's smile, but none of her grace. He walked up to the podium as the applause began. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "Today marks a new chapter in our journey. When I took over this company, I dreamed of taking it beyond Texas, beyond America, into the world. That dream is now reality." The crowd cheered. At 10:58, Claire opened her laptop at her desk and hovered over the publish button. Her pulse raced. The headline glowed on the screen: "The forgotten founder of Hayden Robotics. The truth behind the empire." At 10:59, Howard stepped through the courthouse doors, the envelope in his hand. The clerk looked up as he approached the counter. "Filing for confirmation of ownership," he said, handing it over. The clerk stamped it with the red seal. "Received March 17th, 11:00 a.m. At exactly the same moment, the TV ticker in my living room changed. I watched the numbers flip over on the clock. 11:00. Claire pressed publish. The courthouse filing went live. And Ethan, halfway through his speech, smiled into the cameras. "Hayden Robotics belongs to all who believe in progress," he said proudly. In Austin, headlines began flashing across every phone screen. "Founder never sold company. Legal documents reveal Hayden Robotics, still owned by Michael E. Hayden." Claire's article spread like wildfire. Within minutes, it hit every platform: Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, CNBC. The hashtag #HaydenTruth appeared across the bottom of the live broadcast. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. "Machines don't make mistakes," I whispered. "People do." On screen, the first reporters began to react. The hum of conversation turned into a low roar as the conference room filled with noise. Ethan's confident expression faltered. His assistant rushed up from backstage, whispering urgently in his ear. Cameras zoomed in on his face as the color drained from it. I turned off the TV. The storm had started. I stepped outside, the sunlight bright on my face, the air thick with humidity. The city was alive in the distance, unaware that its favorite prodigy had just fallen from grace. I stood there, breathing slowly, feeling neither joy nor vengeance, only the quiet satisfaction of a job well built. The foundation was finally speaking for itself. Inside, the clock on the wall ticked past 11. Somewhere downtown, headlines were rewriting themselves. Investors were making frantic calls, and my son was realizing the cost of forgetting who built the ground beneath him. I poured another cup of coffee, sat back down, and waited for the storm to reach full strength. Tomorrow, the world would change, but tonight, silence still belonged to me. The Dallas Convention Center pulsed with light and sound. Hundreds of journalists packed the main hall, cameras lined like rifles pointed toward the stage. Screens on every wall glowed with the blue and silver Hayden Robotics logo. At the front, Ethan stood tall behind a gleaming podium, his smile calm, rehearsed, bulletproof. "Good morning, everyone," he began, voice echoing through the room. "Today, Hayden Robotics steps into its next chapter. We're launching new partnerships in Tokyo, Berlin, and Dubai. Our mission is simple innovation with integrity." The crowd applauded. The sound rolled through the hall like thunder. Ethan basked in it, confident, untouchable. Somewhere in the back row, a CNBC correspondent whispered to her cameraman, "He's the golden boy of Texas Tech." 200 miles away, I sat in my worn armchair, the TV glowing softly in the dim light of my living room. The same words echoed from the broadcast. I stirred my coffee slowly. "Integrity," I murmured. "Let's see how much of that's left." At 10:59, the digital clock on my wall flipped to 11 Hazirshas. The first notification hit my phone. Austin Chronicle, the forgotten founder of Hayden Robotics. Legal filings reveal true ownership. Seconds later, the article spread across every platform. Twitter exploded, hashtags multiplying, # Hayden Truth, # forgotten founder, # corporate betrayal. CNBC broke from its broadcast to report the story live. On LinkedIn, venture capital firms began tagging one another, trying to verify the filings. Screens inside the Dallas Convention Center flickered with alerts as notifications lit up the audience's phones. On stage, Ethan was mid-sentence. "At Hayden Robotics, we believe that Mr. Hayden," a reporter shouted suddenly from the front row. "Can you comment on the breaking news that your father still legally owns the company?" The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in. Ethan blinked, smile faltering. "I'm sorry," what another voice shouted from the left. The Austin Chronicle just published an article showing documents from the Texas Commercial Court. They say Hayden Robotics is owned by Hayden Holdings, LLC, under Michael E. Hayden whispers spread through the crowd like a spark through dry grass. Laptops, open screens glowed. Ethan's assistant hurried onto the stage, phone in hand, face pale. She whispered something in his ear. His jaw tightened. "That's inaccurate," Ethan said, finally forcing a laugh. "My father retired years ago. This must be a misunderstanding." A journalist from Reuters stood up. "Sir, the filings are live on the court's database. They're time-stamped and notarized this morning." "Is it true you never filed an ownership transfer?" Ethan's throat worked as he tried to swallow. "This isn't the place," another reporter interrupted. "Is it also true you've been representing yourself as the founder on national media for over a year?" The flashes from cameras became blinding. The hum of conversation turned to chaos. Ethan's PR director whispered frantically into her phone. The moderator tried to calm the crowd, but the questions came faster than he could answer them. I sat watching it unfold, live, the corners of my mouth curling faintly. In a small courtroom in Austin, Howard stood calmly as the clerk stamped the final confirmation on the filing. Ownership confirmation notice. Michael E. Hayden. He thanked the clerk, checked his watch, 11:06, and called me. "It's done," he said. "They're already talking about it on every business channel." "Good," I replied. "Let the evidence speak." Back on screen. Ethan tried to continue his presentation, his voice cracking. "We're here to discuss innovation, not outdated paperwork." A CNN reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Hayden, your investors are calling this corporate fraud by omission. Do you have any comment?" The moderator whispered something to him, but Ethan's microphone caught his next words. Turn off the feed. Now. But it was too late. The live stream was still rolling, broadcasting every second to millions of viewers. In Austin, the phones in Howard's office rang non-stop, journalists, lawyers, shareholders. Claire's article had already crossed 3 million views. CNBC cut back to the anchor desk mid-broadcast. Breaking news, the anchor announced. Legal filings confirm that Hayden Robotics, currently valued at $3.2 billion, is owned by its original founder, Michael E. Hayden. This directly contradicts statements made by CEO Ethan Hayden in multiple interviews over the past year. At the bottom of the screen, the ticker flashed, "Blue-collar engineer outsmarts corporate elites." I took a slow sip of coffee. On stage, Ethan's hands trembled as he tried to regain control. Look, my father founded the company, yes, but he's not involved anymore. This is an administrative technicality. A voice from the back of the hall cut through the noise. Then, why are you listed nowhere on the filings, Mr. Hayden? The audience turned. A young reporter stepped forward. Claire Donovan press badge glinting under the lights. The same woman who had written the article. Ethan froze when he saw her. You, he said quietly. Recognition dawning too late. Claire's voice was calm, clear, unshakable. The people deserve to know the truth. Did you knowingly hide your father's ownership from investors? His lips parted, but no words came out. Cameras zoomed in close, catching the sweat on his forehead. The world watched as his silence filled the room. The moderator stepped up, whispering that the feed had been cut, but the damage was done. Every second had been streamed and clipped, replayed, and shared. Within minutes, the headlines multiplied. Hayden Robotics implodes on live broadcast. Father still holds deed to empire. Son's legacy built on false ground. At home, I muted the television and sat in stillness. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. I wasn't smiling anymore. I just felt finished. The fight was over. The truth was working on its own now, a machine running flawlessly without my touch. By noon, Ethan's investors were pulling out. Stockholders demanded an emergency meeting. Lance Murdoch, the silver-haired financier who had praised my son, released a statement distancing himself from the company. We were not aware of discrepancies in ownership structure, he said. This revelation changes everything. I walked outside and sat on the porch steps, the spring air warm and still. A neighbor across the street waved. Saw the news, Mike, you really showed them. I waved back half-heartedly. Didn't show them, I said under my breath, just reminded them. On the TV, behind me, the broadcast cut back to a studio panel dissecting the fallout. One analyst said, it's unprecedented, a working-class founder using his own paperwork to take down a billionaire's son. This is what you call blue-collar justice. The phrase hung in the air. Blue-collar justice. I didn't think of myself as a hero. Just a man who built something right the first time and refused to let others tear it apart. By evening, Ethan's press team announced he was taking time to reassess leadership responsibilities. Investors called for his resignation. The HRX tower lights dimmed early that night, as if even the building felt ashamed. I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the tower fade in the distance. The phone rang Howard again. You won, Michael, he said. The filings are airtight. There's nothing they can do. Winning's not the point, I said quietly. I just wanted the truth to be visible. He chuckled softly. You engineers and your metaphors. After I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time watching lightning flicker on the horizon. I could almost hear Marianne's voice, soft and certain. The foundation matters more than the design. Tomorrow would bring chaos, lawsuits, interviews, apologies. But tonight, there was only quiet. I turned off the TV, let the silence fill the house, and poured myself another cup of coffee. The storm outside grew louder, distant thunder rolling across the Texas hills. Justice didn't roar. It hummed steady and precise, like a well-built machine finally switched back on. The morning after the collapse was eerily quiet. News vans crowded the street outside Ethan's penthouse, their cameras pointed at the glass doors like vultures waiting for movement. Reporters shouted questions to empty air. Inside, according to the headlines, he hadn't left his apartment all night. The world was watching the young CEO who had mocked his father on television, only to be undone by a document signed decades earlier. By 8 o'clock, every major outlet had picked up the story. CNN, corporate son exposed father, still owns Hayden Robotics. CNBC, blue-collar founder outsmarts Silicon heirs. Forbes, how a forgotten patent crushed a $3 billion empire. I sat my kitchen toast, untouched coffee cooling beside the newspaper. I'd never cared much for fame, but it was strange seeing my name printed in bold again after all these years. Not as a footnote, but as the headline. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from journalists and investors. I didn't answer any of them. At 9:15, I received an email from Claire. He's agreed to go live tonight on CNBC's evening program. They're calling it The Hayden Legacy Truth or Betrayal. You should watch. I typed back only 2 words. I will. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Howard dropped by to confirm the filings had gone through cleanly. No appeals, no loopholes, no room for argument. You've built something airtight, he said, shaking his head with a smile. The kind of structure lawyers dream about. It's not a structure, I said. It's a correction. That night, the air felt heavy, almost electric. I sat in my old armchair, the TV remote resting in my lap, the room lit only by the flickering blue glow of the screen. The CNBC countdown played across the bottom corner live. The Hayden legacy begins in 5 minutes. When the broadcast opened, the studio lights were blinding. Ethan sat across from the young anchor Lena Porter, a woman with steel gray eyes and a voice trained to slice through pretense. The chyron beneath them read, Ethan Hayden, CEO, or imposter. Good evening, Lena began. Tonight we're joined by Ethan Hayden, the CEO of Hayden Robotics, a company that's been at the center of controversy since yesterday's explosive revelation. She turned to him. Ethan, thank you for agreeing to speak publicly. He smiled stiffly. Thank you for having me. There's been a lot of misinformation spreading. I want to clear the air. Then let's start simple, she said, leaning forward. The filings released yesterday confirmed that Hayden Robotics is still legally owned by your father, Michael E. Hayden. Is that true? Ethan adjusted his tie, trying to appear calm. Technically, yes. But this is purely a clerical issue. My father's ownership is historical, not functional. I've been running the company for years. Lena lifted a sheet of paper. This clerical issue, as you call it, includes active patents, trademarks, and tax records still registered under Hayden Holdings. That's not historical. That's current. He forced a chuckle. Look, my father founded the company, but he stepped away. Everyone knows that. We've modernized, expanded, she interrupted. And yet, you've repeatedly referred to yourself as the sole founder in interviews, on social media, even during last week's press conference. Was that a deliberate misrepresentation? The tension in the studio was palpable. Ethan's smile faltered. No, that's not look. I've always honored my father's work. Lena's voice stayed level. Last year, during an interview with Forbes, you said, and I quote, I built Hayden Robotics from the ground up. Were you misquoted? The silence that followed was brutal. He started, then stopped. The camera caught the twitch in his jaw, the shift of his eyes. I meant I rebuilt it. The company you see today is my vision. Lena didn't look away. Your vision built on a foundation you didn't own. A ripple of murmurs moved through the live audience. Somewhere in the studio control room, a producer's voice came over her earpiece. "We've confirmed Mr. Hayden Sr. is on standby video call if you want to patch him in." She gave the slightest nod. "Ethan," she said, "your father has agreed to join us briefly from Austin. Would you like to speak with him?" His eyes widened. "What now?" Before he could answer, the massive LED screen behind him flickered to life. My face appeared sitting in my worn chair, the soft light of my living room spilling across my shoulders. For a moment, Ethan froze. The cameras captured everything, the shock, the disbelief, the flicker of guilt that crossed his face. "Mr. Hayden," Lena said, "thank you for joining us. Do you have a statement you'd like to make?" I nodded once. "Only this. Ownership is paperwork. Legacy is what you leave behind. I built this company to stand for honesty and hard work. I'm sorry to see those words traded for convenience." Ethan swallowed hard. "Dad, you could have talked to me privately. We didn't need to do this in front of everyone." I looked at him through the camera, calm and unflinching. "You stopped listening privately, son." The studio went silent. Even Lena seemed to hesitate, sensing the weight of the moment. Ethan's voice broke slightly. I didn't mean to disrespect you." "You didn't just disrespect me," I said. "You disrespected every person who built something honest and watched someone else take the credit." He lowered his head. For the first time since this began, he looked less like a CEO and more like a boy who'd finally realized the cost of arrogance. Lena turned to him softly. "Is there anything you'd like to say to your father, Ethan?" He hesitated, voice small. "I'm sorry." The words barely reached me, but I heard them. I gave a slow nod. "Then start fixing what you broke. Not with words, with actions." Lena looked from me to Ethan. "Gentlemen, thank you. This has been enlightening." The broadcast ended with a quiet fade to black. I switched off the television, the room returning to its soft silence. Outside, the cicadas hummed the Texas night, heavy and still. My phone buzzed messages from Howard, Claire, even a few former employees. "Congratulations. You did it. Justice, finally." I didn't reply. I poured myself a cup of tea instead and sat back down, letting the quiet fill the room. Justice didn't roar. It didn't need to. It just breathed quietly when the truth came home. Across the city, the HRX tower was dark, the logo unlit for the first time in months. Ethan's face would be on the morning papers, his downfall dissected by every analyst and pundit. But none of that mattered. The truth had found its way to the surface, steady as gravity, inevitable as sunrise. I took a slow sip, looking toward the faint lights of downtown Austin in the distance. Machines don't lie. People do. But sometimes, if you build them right, the truth will run on its own. I smiled, not out of triumph, but out of peace. The foundation had held. And in the end, that was all I ever wanted. The morning sun came late through the blinds, cutting thin lines of gold across my kitchen table. The newspaper had already arrived, folded neatly beside the door. The front page was impossible to miss, Ethan's face pale and tense. Beneath the headline, "The Fall of a Prodigy, Hayden Robotics Returns to Its Founder." I poured coffee, the sound of it steady and calm. I didn't smile. There was no need. Some victories speak louder in silence. The phone wouldn't stop ringing that morning. Journalists, investors, talk shows, everyone wanted a comment. I unplugged it and let the world talk to itself. Justice had already spoken, and she didn't need my help. On TV, they replayed the interview again and again, the moment Ethan froze on live air, my words echoing through the broadcast. Ownership is paperwork. Legacy is what you leave behind. Analysts called it the quote of the year, They debated whether it was poetic or cold. I didn't think about it either way. It was just the truth. By midday, CNBC announced that the Hayden Robotics Board had called an emergency meeting. Ethan hadn't shown up. A reporter standing outside his penthouse said the blinds were still drawn, the lights still off. The same network then cut to footage of the courthouse in Austin Howard stepping down the marble stairs with a statement for the press. The court has confirmed Mr. Michael Hayden as the sole legal owner of Hayden Holdings and all subsidiary companies, he read. The filings are final and no appeals have been submitted. Reporters shouted questions, but he only smiled slightly and said, "Sometimes the simplest truths take the longest to be heard." I watched it all unfold with a strange calmness. The world was noisy again, but it wasn't my noise. It belonged to them. In the afternoon, Claire called. Her voice sounded softer than usual. "You saw it, right? The networks, the headlines. You're everywhere. I saw," I said. "They're calling it the biggest corporate reckoning of the decade." "What are you going to do next?" "Go back to work," I said. She laughed. "You mean real work, the kind that doesn't need cameras," I said. "I've had enough of cameras." Before hanging up, she said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad the story found its way home." "So am I," said quietly. That evening, the mailman dropped off an envelope with the Hayden Robotics seal. Inside was a formal letter from the company's interim board. They offered apologies, gratitude, and an open invitation to return as chairman if I wished. I read it twice, folded it, and set it aside. I had no interest in sitting at that table again. The next few days passed in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. I fixed a neighbor's lawnmower, helped a teenager rebuild a carburetor for his motorcycle, and cleaned the old garage. The silence of work was the closest thing to prayer I knew. Meanwhile, Ethan was nowhere to be found. Reporters speculated that he had left Dallas, that he was hiding from the cameras. The company's stock stabilized after I released a short statement confirming that no employees would lose their jobs and all operations would continue. I didn't blame them for following him. People follow charisma more easily than character. But I'd built this company to last, not to shine. 3 days later, I got a message from Howard. He wants to see you. I didn't reply right away. For hours, I sat in the quiet of the garage staring at the old blueprint pinned to the wall, the first design Ethan and I ever worked on together. The corners were yellowed, the ink faded. I could still see his 8-year-old handwriting beside mine, shaky but determined. "Make it perfect, Dad." By sunset, I texted back, "Tell him where to meet me." The next morning, Ethan showed up at the old warehouse on the east side of town, the one we used to call the shop before it turned into headquarters. The place had been empty for years. Dust covered the floors, sunlight cutting through broken windows. He walked in slowly, dressed simply for once, jeans, a plain shirt, no watch, no entourage. His face was drawn tired. "I didn't think you'd come," I said. "I didn't think you'd agree to see me," he replied. We stood there for a long moment saying nothing. The air between us was thick with everything that had gone wrong. "I messed up," he said finally. "I thought success was proof that I was right. I forgot where it came from." I nodded once. "You didn't forget. You ignored it." He looked down. "You could have ruined me, Dad." "Completely. I didn't want to ruin you," I said. "I wanted you to stop ruining yourself." He took a breath. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said. "But you can earn it back. Same way we earn respect by building." He lifted his eyes, and for a second I saw the boy. I remembered the one who used to sit at my workbench, grease on his fingers, wonder in his eyes. "I don't know where to start," he said. I reached into my bag and pulled out an old folded paper. It was the first schematic for our prototype arm. I handed it to him. "Start here," I said. "You'll remember how it feels." He unfolded it carefully, running his fingers over the lines. You kept it all these years. I keep everything that works, I said. He smiled barely. You're not coming back to the company, are you? I shook my head. It's your turn to build something worth owning. He folded the blueprint and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Thank you, he said quietly. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Instead, we shook hands firm, steady, clean. Two builders finishing what pride had once broken. When he left, I stayed behind in the empty warehouse for a while, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade. The sunlight slanted through the windows, dust swirling like golden smoke. I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not relief, just balance. A month later, I made it official. I transferred ownership of Hayden Robotics to a new entity, the Hayden Foundation. Its purpose was simple: to fund engineering programs for kids who couldn't afford college, to give them the same chance I once had. I kept a small advisory role, but nothing more. The company didn't need me anymore, and that was a good thing. Claire wrote one last article about it, the foundation that built itself. Her words were kinder than I deserved. Michael Hayden proved that legacy isn't about control, she wrote. It's about continuity. When the foundation's website went live, I turned off the computer and stepped outside. The spring wind smelled like rain and new grass. Across the yard, the neighbor's son was tinkering with a broken drone. I walked over and offered to help. He grinned and handed me a screwdriver. As we worked, I looked down at the small, curious face beside me and felt a quiet kind of peace. Legacy wasn't about ownership. It was about leaving something that still worked, even when you were gone. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I went back to the garage. On the desk sat one last photo, Marianne young and smiling, holding Ethan on her hip. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "We finished it, love. It finally works." Then I turned off the light, and for the first time in years, the silence felt full instead of empty. The morning light fell softly through the garage window, scattering gold dust across the workbench. The smell of metal and coffee mixed in the air, familiar grounding. Michael sat in his chair, hands steady, guiding a young boy's fingers as they tightened a bolt on a small robot prototype. The hum of an old fan turned slowly above them. "Did you really build the first one all by yourself?" the boy asked. Eyes wide, voice full of curiosity. Michael smiled faintly. "No," he said, tightening the last screw. "Nothing worth building is ever built alone." The boy nodded, though he didn't quite understand yet. He would. In time, everyone does. Outside, the sun had just begun to climb over Austin's skyline. The Hayden Foundation's sign gleamed on the refurbished warehouse across the street. It was no longer a monument to profit. It was a place where ideas and integrity found new hands. Students came from every corner of Texas carrying notebooks, soldering irons, and dreams. Inside, the smell of oil and ambition was the same as it had been 30 years ago. Ethan ran the morning class now. The young engineers called him Mr. Hayden, but when he laughed, he sounded like the boy who once built toy machines in a garage with his father. He moved through the rows of students, correcting wiring, offering quiet advice, patient and kind. When Michael walked in, the chatter grew quiet, and Ethan turned with a smile that no longer had pride in it, only peace. "Morning, Dad," he said. "You're just in time. They're working on torque calibration." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Hope they remember what happens when you skip the foundation." The students laughed, and Ethan grinned. "I already warned them. Build it right, or it won't stand." Michael stood at the back of the class, watching. The sound of drills, the sparks, the soft concentration. It was music. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The next generation was already learning what mattered most. By afternoon, the foundation was full of energy. Outside, a plaque had been mounted beside the entrance in honor of the builders who remember their foundations. Visitors often stopped to read it, some taking pictures, others just nodding quietly before walking inside. That evening, after the students had gone home, Ethan joined his father in the garage. He brought 2 cups of coffee and handed one over. "Mom used to say coffee tasted better when it cooled," Ethan said softly. Michael took a sip, smiling. "She said that about patience, too." They sat together in silence for a while, the orange glow of sunset washing over the workbench. The air was warm, still humming faintly from the machines cooling down. "You did good today," Michael said. Ethan shrugged. "I'm just trying to fix what I broke." Michael turned toward him. "You already started fixing it. That's what counts." Ethan hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." He handed over a small wooden box. Inside was a brass nameplate polished and engraved with careful precision, Michael E. Hayden. Builder, father, teacher. Michael traced the letters with his thumb, his eyes glinting in the fading light. "This one," he said softly, "I'll keep." They sat there as the light faded, 2 silhouettes surrounded by the quiet heartbeat of creation. Neither spoke again for a long while. They didn't have to. Weeks passed, and the foundation flourished. The first scholarship students presented their projects: solar-powered tools, automated irrigation systems, prosthetic hands built from recycled parts. Every one of them carried a piece of Michael's philosophy: work hard, stay honest, build things that last. He attended the first graduation ceremony that summer. Rows of students in blue overalls stood under the Texas sky, holding their certificates high. The sound of applause rolled across the courtyard like thunder. When they asked him to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and said simply, "You built something that works. That's the only kind of success that matters." The crowd rose to their feet. Cameras flashed, but he didn't notice. His eyes were on Ethan, standing at the edge of the stage, clapping harder than anyone else. That night, Michael walked home alone. The sky was full of stars, and the air carried the soft hum of the city. He thought about everything he had lost and everything he had found again. The company, the money, the recognition, they had all been temporary. But this peace, this quiet continuation, was permanent. When he reached his porch, he sat down, setting his mug beside him. The light in the window behind him glowed faintly, and for a brief moment he could almost imagine Marianne there, standing in the doorway, smiling that same patient smile. "You were right," he murmured. "The foundation always holds." He closed his eyes, listening to the night, the chirp of crickets, the hum of distant cars, the faint laughter of the students leaving the workshop across the street. It was the sound of things working as they should. After a while he spoke again, as if to the air itself. "They say time builds character, but I think time just reveals it. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I remembered what mattered: the truth, the craft, and the people who built beside me. And if anyone out there has ever been overlooked, ignored, or written off..." He paused, letting the wind finish his sentence. "Remember, this silence isn't weakness. It's just the sound of someone preparing to rise." The last light faded behind the hills, leaving only the soft blue glow of the foundation sign across the street. It reflected faintly in the window beside him, like a heartbeat that would keep on long after he was gone. He stood, turned off the porch light, and headed back into the house. The camera lingered on the garage window for a moment. The scattered tools, the framed blueprints, the empty chair bathed in the warmth of memory. Then the screen faded to black, and Michael's voice returned one last time, calm and steady, like the hum of an old machine that still runs perfectly. If this story meant something to you, share it. Tell me what foundation you're building in your own life. And if you still believe that honesty and hard work matter, stay a while. There are more stories waiting to be built. The final sound was the soft clink of metal against wood, an unfinished machine waiting for the next set of hands. Fade out.